I walked into my wife's office carrying roses and 2 tickets to Paris and stopped cold as her CEO dropped to one knee with a diamond ring. For one foolish second, I thought I had opened the wrong door. But there was Laura, my wife of 19 years, standing beside her desk in the corner office of Vail and Crest Marketing in downtown Nashville. Her hand was pressed to her mouth. Her eyes were wide. And Preston Vail, the polished CEO, whose face appeared on company newsletters and charity banners, was kneeling in front of her like he belonged there. I felt the roses bend in my grip. The Paris tickets were tucked inside my coat pocket, still warm from my hand. It was Valentine's Day, just after 5:40 in the evening. I had left a job site early in Bellevue, stopped at Kroger for flowers, and fought downtown traffic because I wanted to do something good for my marriage. Laura had been distant for months. Late nights, short answers, quiet dinners. I told myself she was tired. I told myself every marriage had seasons. So I planned Paris. Not because I was rich. I was a self-employed electrical contractor. I knew the price of copper wire better than I knew the price of champagne. But I had saved for nearly a year, little by little, because Laura used to say she wanted to see Paris before we got too old to enjoy walking all day. I came to surprise her. Instead, I stood in that doorway, watching another man offer her a ring. My body moved before my mind did. I took one step forward, ready to shove the door open and say something I could never take back. That was when a woman grabbed my arm. She was around 50, maybe older, with tired eyes, a gray wool coat, and a phone clutched in one hand. She didn't look crazy. She looked scared. "Please," she whispered. "If you love your wife, don't go in there." I tried to pull away. "Who are you?" "Someone who already made the mistake you're about to make." Inside the office, Preston was speaking softly. I couldn't catch every word, but I heard enough. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Laura didn't answer. The woman beside me tightened her grip. "Look at her face," she whispered. "That isn't love." I looked again, and for the first time I noticed it. Laura wasn't smiling. She looked trapped. I let the office door ease shut without making a sound. Every instinct I had screamed at me to go back, kick it open, and demand an explanation. Instead, I followed the woman down the hallway past empty cubicles and framed advertising awards until we reached a small seating area near the elevators. She didn't speak until the elevator doors closed behind a group of employees heading home. "My name is Dana Whitmore." I folded my arms. "You said you made the same mistake." "I did." "You walked away." "No." She looked down for a moment. I stormed in. I accused the wrong people, and the only man who deserved to be exposed used my anger against me. I studied her face. There was no bitterness in her voice, just exhaustion. "I don't know you," I said, "so tell me why I should believe a word you're saying." "You shouldn't." That answer caught me off guard. "You should verify everything yourself." She reached into her purse and handed me a business card. It wasn't for a lawyer. It wasn't for a private investigator. It simply read, "Dana Whitmore, Certified Fraud Examiner." I looked back up. "What does that have to do with my wife?" "More than you realize." She nodded toward Laura's office. "Preston Vail doesn't chase women because he's lonely." "Then why?" "He chases people who feel they have something to lose." I frowned. "I just watched him propose." "You watched him corner someone." Those words landed harder than I expected. Dana glanced at the closed office door before continuing. "My husband Michael owned part of a software company Preston wanted to acquire. What happened? He made one expensive mistake during a government contract. Everybody makes mistakes." "Exactly." She gave a sad smile. "Most bosses help you fix them." "And Preston? He helps you, until helping turns into control." She explained that Michael had become dependent on Preston's solutions. One favor became another, then confidential information, then financial pressure. By the time Michael realized what was happening, he'd lost his company, his reputation, and eventually his health. "He died 2 years ago." "I'm sorry." "So am I." She looked directly into my eyes. "When I heard Preston had started spending late nights with your wife, I didn't assume they were having an affair." "You didn't?" "I assumed he'd found another person who believed she had no way out." I wanted to reject everything she was saying. It sounded impossible. Yet one detail kept bothering me. Laura hadn't looked happy. She hadn't looked excited. She'd looked frightened. Dana checked the time on her phone. "In about 3 minutes, your wife will leave that office." "What are you suggesting?" "Go home." "And pretend I never saw this." "No." She slipped a folded sheet of paper into my hand. "Go home, love your wife. Watch carefully, ask nothing tonight." I unfolded it. Written across the top were 6 dates. Each one was followed by a late-night meeting between Preston and Laura. The first date was almost 8 months old. Dana stood. "If I'm wrong, you'll lose one evening." She headed toward the elevator, then stopped. "But if I'm right, walking through that door today would have been the biggest gift you could have given Preston." The elevator doors closed behind her. A minute later, Laura stepped out of her office alone. She wasn't wearing a diamond ring. She was quietly wiping away tears. I waited until Laura drove out of the parking garage before I started my truck. She never noticed I was 2 blocks behind her. Not because I was trying to spy on my wife, because I needed one more answer before I convinced myself I'd imagined everything. She didn't stop at a restaurant. She didn't meet Preston. She didn't pull into some hotel parking lot. She drove straight home to our house in Franklin. When I walked through the front door 15 minutes later, Murphy, our 12-year-old golden retriever, greeted me with his usual slow wag. Laura was already in the kitchen rinsing lettuce for a salad. She looked up and smiled. "You're home early." "So are you." I finished faster than I expected. There was a faint redness around her eyes. If I hadn't seen her earlier, I would have assumed she was just tired. She walked over and kissed my cheek. "You smell like sawdust." "I've been working." "I know." She rested her hand on my arm for just a second before returning to the cutting board. That small touch nearly broke me. The woman who had just kissed me was the same woman I'd watched standing in front of another man's proposal less than an hour earlier. Over dinner, we talked about ordinary things. Murphy's arthritis, my younger brother's fishing trip, whether we should replace the aging water heater before winter. Laura laughed once when Murphy stole a carrot off the floor. For a few minutes, our life looked exactly the way it always had. Except every time she looked down at her plate, I wondered what she wasn't saying. That night after she fell asleep, I quietly slipped out of bed. Dana's words echoed in my mind. "Watch carefully, ask nothing." Laura had always been organized. Bills went into one drawer, insurance papers into another. She believed paperwork should never become an emergency. I opened the small filing cabinet in our home office. Nothing looked unusual. Mortgage statements, tax returns, retirement accounts. Then I noticed a plain manila folder tucked beneath a stack of utility bills. There was no label. Inside were copies of federal advertising compliance guidelines. Several pages had been highlighted. Attached was a handwritten note. "Need to correct before audit. Don't let PV handle this alone." PV, Preston Vale. My pulse quickened. Beneath those papers sat another envelope. It contained a mortgage refinance package. Our names were printed neatly across the front. Most of the forms were complete. Mine still required a signature. I frowned. Laura and I had talked about refinancing months ago, but she never mentioned the paperwork had already been prepared. The final page caught my attention. The loan officer's appointment had been scheduled for the following Tuesday, 5 days away. I carefully returned everything exactly as I'd found it. As I closed the drawer, something slipped onto the floor. A folded pharmacy receipt, prescription anxiety medication, filled just 3 weeks earlier. Laura had never told me she'd started taking it. I stood there in the dark office holding that tiny receipt. An affair suddenly seemed less certain. Fear. That felt undeniable. For the first time since Valentine's Day began, I wasn't asking whether my wife had betrayed me. I was asking what had frightened her badly enough to keep suffering alone. I didn't go back to sleep. Instead, I sat on the back porch until sunrise with a cup of black coffee growing cold in my hands. The February air carried that damp Tennessee chill that settles into your bones, and for the first time in my life, I realized how little I knew about the woman I'd shared nearly 2 decades with. At 9 o'clock, I called Dana. She answered on the second ring. "You found something." "How did you know?" "Because you called." An hour later, we met at a small coffee shop in Brentwood, the kind of place where retirees gathered every morning to read newspapers and argue about the Titans. Dana listened without interrupting as I described the refinance package, the compliance documents, and the anxiety medication. When I finished, she slowly nodded. "That's exactly what I was afraid of." "What does that mean?" She reached into a worn leather folder and slid a newspaper clipping across the table. The headline was 3 years old. "Regional marketing firm pays $18 million. Settlement over false advertising claims." I skimmed the article. "What does this have to do with Laura?" "The company isn't important." She tapped the article with one finger. "The pattern is." Dana explained that Preston never targeted careless employees. He targeted good ones, the kind who worked late, the kind who blamed themselves when something went wrong, the kind who would sacrifice almost anything to protect their reputation. "People like Laura," she said. I leaned back. "You're saying she made a mistake." "I'm saying she's human." Dana opened another folder. Inside were copies of corporate records and public filings. About 8 months ago, your wife approved a national advertising campaign. I know, she mentioned it. The campaign accidentally violated new federal disclosure rules. I frowned. Would that get her fired? If it became public, it could cost the company millions. My stomach tightened. So Preston covered it up. Yes. And now she owes him. Dana shook her head. No. Then what? He wants her to believe she owes him. There was a difference. A huge one. He didn't save her career because he cared, Dana continued. He saved it because frightened people are easier to control than confident ones. I thought about the note I'd found. Don't let PV handle this alone. Laura had tried to fix the problem herself. Preston hadn't let her. Then the proposal was never about romance. Dana's voice stayed calm. It was about ownership. I stared through the coffee shop window. An older couple walked past holding hands. For a moment, I envied them. No CEO proposes marriage in the middle of his office, Dana said quietly. Not if he actually expects a happy ending. So why do it? To send a message. What message? She met my eyes. I control your future. Suddenly, everything I had seen in Laura's office looked different. Her rigid shoulders, her pale face, the way she'd never reached for the ring. I had mistaken fear for guilt. But one question still haunted me. If she's trapped, I asked softly, why didn't she tell me? Dana didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked down into her coffee. Because shame is a prison people often lock from the inside. I drove home with those words echoing in my head. For the first time since Valentine's Day, I stopped thinking about revenge. I started thinking about rescue. She didn't need rescuing. That was the hardest lesson I learned that week. She needed someone she believed she could trust with the truth. Monday morning, I dropped Murphy off at the veterinarian for his arthritis checkup before driving to a supply warehouse in Murfreesboro. I spent the day wiring a new medical office, but my mind never left Laura. Around 3 that afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Dana. Can you meet me after work? I found someone you need to talk to. At 6, I met her outside a quiet diner in Brentwood. Waiting inside was a woman in her early 60s, wearing a navy blazer and reading glasses. She introduced herself as Janice Holloway. I retired from Vail and Crest 6 months ago, she said. Were you Laura's boss? No. She smiled faintly. I was her mentor. Janice stirred her coffee before speaking again. Laura used to be one of the most confident women in that building. What changed? Preston. She explained that Laura had never intentionally broken company policy. The federal disclosure rules had changed halfway through a national campaign. Laura approved one version of the ads before the legal department finished updating the requirements. The mistake wasn't criminal. It wasn't even unusual. It should have resulted in additional disclosures, some corrected paperwork, and a very uncomfortable meeting. Instead, Preston stepped in personally. He told Laura he'd make the problem disappear, Janice said. And he did, on paper. She paused, but afterward he kept reminding her what he had saved her from. I felt my jaw tighten. He made her believe she owed him. Janice nodded. At first it was harmless. Extra meetings, private strategy sessions, weekend phone calls. Then Preston began isolating her. He insisted certain conversations stay confidential. He discouraged her from speaking with the legal department. Eventually, Laura stopped trusting everyone except him. Dana quietly slid another document across the table. It wasn't a financial statement. It was a retirement account summary. Laura's balance had dropped by nearly $80,000 over the past year. I looked at Janice. Why, Janice answered softly. She was trying to repay the company's losses herself. I stared at the page. Laura had sold investments we'd planned to use one day, without telling me. I don't understand. You will. Janice reached into her purse and pulled out a small velvet jewelry box. Inside, nothing. My mother gave Laura a pearl necklace when she became partner. What happened to it? She sold it. Dana spoke quietly. And not because Preston asked. I frowned. Then why? Because she thought if she repaid enough money herself, he'd finally leave her alone. My chest ached. Laura hadn't been spending money on secret vacations. She'd been quietly dismantling pieces of her own future. As we stood to leave, Janice touched my arm. Mark. Yes. If you confront Laura tonight, she'll deny everything. You think so? I know so. What? Because frightened people don't stop hiding the moment they find someone willing to help. Driving home, I realized something that shook me more than the proposal ever had. The woman I'd been preparing to accuse had been drowning only a few feet away, and I never noticed. Mark Reynolds had spent 22 years solving electrical problems. Loose wires, hidden shorts, faulty breakers. You didn't fix those by swinging a hammer. You found the source. That became my plan. The next morning, I called Richard Lawson, a business attorney, a contractor friend had recommended years earlier. An hour later, I was sitting in his office near downtown Franklin. He listened carefully while I laid everything on his conference table. Dana's timeline, the refinance package, Janice's statement, the compliance documents. When I finished, Richard leaned back in his chair. Your wife may have exercised poor judgment, he said, but that's very different from willingly committing fraud. So where do I start? By proving facts instead of assumptions? He handed me a legal pad. Build a timeline. For the next 3 days, that's exactly what I did. I compared Laura's calendar with our bank records. Every late-night strategy meeting, every unexplained transfer, every company dinner, patterns began to emerge. Nearly every questionable event happened within 48 hours of Preston scheduling a private meeting. That wasn't coincidence. It was control. Dana kept digging through public records. Richard subpoenaed corporate filings that anyone could legally request. Then we found it. Blue Lantern Consulting. It wasn't really a consulting company. It was little more than a shell business receiving payments from Vail and Crest through vague executive advisory invoices. Some of that money was later routed into accounts controlled by Preston's family trust. Richard looked at me. This doesn't prove criminal conduct, but it proves someone should start asking uncomfortable questions. For the first time since Valentine's Day, I felt like I was moving instead of reacting. That evening, Laura sat across from me at dinner. You've been quieter lately. I've had a lot on my mind. I noticed. She hesitated. Did I do something wrong? There it was. The opening I'd been waiting for. I almost asked her about Preston. I almost told her everything I knew. Instead, I looked into the tired eyes of the woman I'd loved for 19 years. Not yet. If Dana and Janice were right, Laura wasn't protecting Preston anymore. She was protecting herself from the shame she believed she'd brought into our marriage. I've just been worried about work, I said. She gave a small, relieved nod. I understand. After dinner, she disappeared into the home office. I quietly watched from the hallway. She opened the refinance folder, looked at it for nearly a minute. Then, she closed it without signing a single page. Instead, she wiped away a tear. That tiny moment told me more than any bank statement ever could. She wasn't rushing toward Preston. She was trying to find the courage to walk away. When she went upstairs, I took out my phone. I texted Dana. We're done reacting. Now we build the case. Within seconds, she replied, good. Because I just learned the board of directors is meeting next Friday. For the first time, I believed justice might come from the truth instead of my anger. By Thursday evening, I couldn't carry it any longer. Not because I had run out of evidence. Because I had run out of pretending. Laura was sitting on the back porch, wrapped in an old gray sweatshirt, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. Murphy lay at her feet, his head resting on her shoe. She looked tired. Not physically, spiritually. I carried 2 mugs of coffee outside and handed her one. She smiled weakly. Thanks. We sat there in silence for almost a minute. Finally, I spoke. I know about Preston. The mug stopped halfway to her lips. She didn't look at me. She simply set it down on the table with trembling hands. I don't know what you mean, Laura. Still, she said nothing. I know about the proposal. Her shoulders collapsed. Not dramatically. Just enough that I knew she couldn't keep holding everything together. You were there, she whispered. I was. A tear rolled down her cheek. You should have come in. I almost did. She buried her face in her hands. I'm so sorry. I moved my chair closer. I'm not here to yell. She looked up, surprised. I'm here because I want the truth. For a long time, all I heard was the wind moving through the trees. Then she finally began. It started with one mistake. She told me everything. The advertising campaign. The compliance issue. Preston's promise that he'd make it disappear. At first, she thought he was protecting the company. Then the private meeting started. The favors, the late-night phone calls. The reminders that one anonymous report could end her career. I should have told you. You should have. I wanted to. I know. She wiped away another tear. I was ashamed. She admitted selling her retirement investments. The pearl necklace Janice had given her. Even postponing repairs on her mother's house so she could quietly repay what she believed she owed. Then she looked me straight in the eye. The proposal wasn't real. What do you mean? He never asked me to marry him. I frowned. I saw him on one knee. He was acting. She took a slow breath. He said if anyone ever questioned our meetings, people would assume we were having an affair. I stared at her. He wanted rumors. She nodded. Because rumors are easier to believe than coercion. Suddenly everything fit together. The ring, the closed office door, the secrecy, the fear. Laura reached into her sweatshirt pocket and handed me a small flash drive. I copied these weeks ago. What's on it? Emails. Why didn't you give them to someone? I was terrified no one would believe me. I took her hand. It was ice cold. You don't have to carry this alone anymore. She closed her eyes and began to cry, not the quiet tears I'd seen all week, but the kind that come after months of holding everything inside. I held her while she cried. Not because everything was forgiven. It wasn't. Trust doesn't heal in a single conversation. But for the first time in months, there were no more secrets between us. And that gave us something we hadn't had in a very long time, a chance to face the truth together. The following Tuesday felt longer than any workday I'd ever lived through. Richard Lawson had spent the weekend organizing documents into 3 neat binders. Dana had prepared a timeline that connected every private meeting, every suspicious payment, and every corporate filing. Laura had barely slept. More than once, I found her sitting at the kitchen table before dawn reading the same email over and over. I keep wondering if I should just resign, she said quietly. Richard shook his head. If you resign now, Preston controls the story. So what do? You tell the truth before he tells his version. At 10 o'clock that morning, we walked into the headquarters of Vale and Crest. Not through the front lobby where clients entered. Through the executive conference entrance on the 3rd floor. The company's independent board had agreed to hear Richard's presentation before its regularly scheduled quarterly meeting. No reporters, no employees, no public spectacle. Just 6 board members, the company's outside counsel, and the chairwoman, Ellen Brooks. Preston wasn't in the room. Not yet. Richard spoke first. This is not a criminal accusation, he began calmly. This is evidence that deserves an independent investigation. Dana presented the financial trail. Blue Lantern Consulting, Shell invoices, payments that matched Preston's private meetings. Then Laura stood. I'd never seen her look so nervous. She didn't hide behind lawyers. She didn't make excuses. My name is Laura Reynolds, she began. I violated company policy by failing to report a compliance issue immediately. That mistake is mine. The room remained silent. But everything that happened afterward, she paused, taking a slow breath, happened because I believed fear was easier to live with than honesty. She described the late-night meetings, the pressure, the repeated reminders that Preston could ruin her career, the refinance package, the proposal I had witnessed. Finally, she placed the flash drive on the conference table. I copied these emails because I hoped one day I'd find the courage to tell the truth. The board's outside attorney inserted the drive into a laptop. One email after another appeared on the screen. None contained romantic language. Instead, they revealed manipulation. Remember who protected you? Don't discuss this with legal. You owe me your loyalty. The chairwoman slowly removed her glasses. Please ask Mr. Vale to join us. 5 minutes later, Preston walked confidently into the room. He smiled when he saw Laura. That smile disappeared the moment he noticed the emails on the screen. He looked at me, then at Dana, finally at the board. For the first time, he wasn't the man controlling the meeting. He was simply another person being asked difficult questions. Richard quietly closed his binder. Our job was finished. Now, the truth could do the talking. Preston answered the first few questions with the confidence of a man who had spent years sitting at the head of conference tables. Those emails have been taken out of context. The consulting payments were properly authorized. My meetings with Ms. Reynolds were part of executive oversight. His voice never rose. His hands stayed folded. If I hadn't lived through the past 8 months, I might have believed him myself. The board chair listened without interrupting. Then she asked one simple question. If everything was appropriate, why were these meetings deliberately kept away from the legal department? For the first time, Preston hesitated. It was a management decision. The company's outside counsel spoke next. We've already confirmed that Blue Lantern Consulting has no employees, no active consulting contracts, and no documented work products supporting these invoices. The room fell silent. Another board member looked directly at Preston. Can you explain that? He couldn't. Not convincingly. Over the next hour, the polished executive everyone admired slowly disappeared. In his place sat a man trying to explain away too many coincidences. Richard never interrupted. Dana never celebrated. Laura never tried to shift the blame. When she was asked whether she had made mistakes, she answered honestly. Yes. When should you have reported the compliance issue? The day I discovered it. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid. Those 2 words carried more weight than any speech could have. Just before noon, the chairwoman called for a short recess. When the board returned, she spoke calmly. Mr. Vale, effective immediately, you are being placed on administrative leave pending an independent investigation. Preston stood. You can't seriously be making this decision based on accusations. We're making this decision based on evidence that requires further review. He looked around the room searching for someone to defend him. No one did. As security escorted him from the executive floor, he glanced back once. Not at Laura. At me. There was no anger in his face anymore. Only disbelief. He had spent so many years controlling frightened people that he never imagined what could happen when they stopped being afraid. Laura resigned later that afternoon. It wasn't because anyone forced her to. She looked at the board and quietly said, "If this company is going to rebuild trust, it deserves a fresh start." The chairwoman thanked her for coming forward. Outside the building, Laura and I stood together on the sidewalk. Traffic rolled steadily along Church Street. People hurried to lunch, completely unaware that our lives had changed forever inside that conference room. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I know. I don't expect you to forgive me today." "I won't." She nodded, accepting the truth. "But forgiveness isn't the same as giving up," I added. For the first time in months, she managed a small, genuine smile. Justice hadn't come through shouting. It hadn't come through humiliation. It came because fear finally lost its grip and the truth was allowed to stand on its own. A year later, Laura and I found ourselves standing beneath the Eiffel Tower. Not because everything had gone back to the way it used to be. It hadn't. Some things never do. The Paris tickets I'd bought for that Valentine's Day had spent nearly 12 months tucked inside my desk drawer. More than once, I thought about throwing them away. Instead, I called the airline. They let me pay a change fee and rebook the trip. A lot had happened during that year. The investigation into Preston's business practices continued long after he left Vale and Crest. Whatever legal consequences followed were handled by the people responsible for finding the facts. I didn't spend my days waiting for updates. Laura found work with a small nonprofit that helped local charities with community outreach. The salary was lower, but she slept through the night again. As for us, we didn't pretend the past had never happened. Every Tuesday evening, we met with a marriage counselor in Franklin. Some sessions ended with hope. Some ended in silence. Healing turned out to be less like flipping a light switch and more like rebuilding a house after a storm. You don't save every board. You don't erase every crack. You simply decide what's worth rebuilding. On our third evening in Paris, we sat at a small cafe across the Seine. Laura looked at the lights reflecting on the water and quietly reached across the table. "I almost lost everything because I believed fear was safer than honesty." I covered her hand with mine. "And I almost lost you because I believed what my eyes saw before I asked what your heart was carrying." Neither of us had been perfect. Both of us had made mistakes. The difference was that eventually we stopped hiding from them. When we walked back toward the hotel, Laura smiled and nodded toward the Eiffel Tower. "You finally got me here." I laughed. "Only took 20 years. She laughed too. It was the same laugh I'd fallen in love with when we were in our 20s. Gentler now, wiser. As we crossed the bridge, I realized something that had taken me far too long to understand. Real revenge isn't watching someone else fall. It's refusing to let bitterness become the person you are. Fear isolates people. Truth gives them a chance to come home. If this story reminded you how important honesty, trust, and courage are in a marriage or in any relationship, I hope you'll take a moment to share it with someone you care about. And if you'd like to hear more stories about ordinary people finding extraordinary strength, I'd be honored if you join me again next time.